Hi, this is Chloe from Inner Whispers. This will be the last video focusing on the cards and their specific meanings. So here we'll look at the cards from the sun through to the cross. Starting with the sun then, here are some images. And the questions. In temperate climes, what words might be used for the sun? What emotions does it evoke? And what are the astrological associations to the sun? So in temperate climes at least, places like Europe where this system was developed, the sun is seen as a harbinger of joy. It's a happy time when we have summer. It's a time when you have the harvest, where you have warmth, where things are a little bit easier perhaps. You get fruits and the harvest more generally, but also it's a joyful time, enjoying the sunshine before the cold of the next winter or after the cold of the last winter, and not so rainy and wet and all those good things that we can enjoy about the summer when the sun isn't too ridiculously hot, because obviously associations to the sun might be very different if you were talking about a system that had developed in Egypt or in the Sahara Desert, for example. So it evokes emotions such as happiness and joy, and it's seen as full of energy in a very positive sense. Astrologically, the sun is about our personality, perhaps our ego, that side of us, the conscious side of us. If you think of your sun sign, that's the most apparent things about you. And so that's where the question about astrological understandings come in, that this can be a card also used for rationality, consciousness, that kind of thing. So if we look at the keywords, we have happiness, success, exposure, energy, growth and fire, enthusiasm and self-confidence, charisma. It can also be used for publishing, bringing things to light, and it's spiritually we're talking about enlightenment or spiritual clarity. In terms of health, we think about things like the eyes, immune system, the healing power of sunshine, vitamin D, healing more generally, energy, and Reiki. Turning to look at the moon, the questions we have are: how is it that we see the moon? What influence does the moon have on the waters of the earth? And what is water symbolically associated with? If you think about how it is that we actually see the moon, we see it because it reflects the light of the sun. So without that, we wouldn't be able to see it. So this is a card of reflection of how we are reflected in the eyes of others, how they see us, therefore about our reputation, our fame, that kind of thing. What influence does the moon have on the waters of the earth? Well, it moves them in cyclical ways with the tides. So this is also a card of cycles. And because of that association to water, there is the side where this can be used to represent emotions. These aren't just the happy emotions that we saw in the heart card, but any kind of emotions, deep emotions, emotions that move us. So the keywords that we have here are emotion, reputation, intuition, empathy, recognition, honour, the soul also, feelings more generally, sensitivity, and a little bit like in tarot we do have things like dreams. Not so much that there's confusion, but that it can be used for dreams more generally. Psychic abilities, the subconscious mind, and cycles. Spiritually, it could be about honouring the phases of the moon and recognising that your emotions are not yourself. In terms of health, we look at the brain, nerves, memory, soul, female cycles, and phantom illnesses. Next up, we have the key. And questions here include: what does a key do? And what words do you associate with the idea of unlocking? So thinking about what a key does, clearly you put it in a lock and turn to unlock or to lock. Mostly it is used more for the idea of opening. So it's about unlocking, it bringing to light It's opening also in the sense of getting a positive answer. It's solving things. So it can be about problem solving, unlocking things more generally. It's often seen as one of the most positive cards in the sense of being a yes answer, if that's something that you choose to use. And the key is about discovery. What will you find when you do that unlocking? Other keywords that we find are insight and clue, sign, security, synchronicity, epiphany even, discoveries more generally and breakthroughs, and things being of significance. Spiritually, it's that spiritual insight or breakthrough or unlocking inner knowing. And in terms of health, we would be talking about the collarbone, sphincters, trace minerals, vitamins, or having an iron constitution, I guess because many keys in the past were made of iron. Next we have the fish. And the questions here include: how many fish are there in a school? How might a fish be affected by water currents? And why might fish be associated with money and with alcohol? So if we think about how many fish there are in a school, the answer is normally a lot. So this card is associated with the idea of there being a quantity of things. So it's not necessarily about quality here, but quantity. And how might a fish be affected by water currents? Obviously a fish does feel those, it can go against them, but it will notice them. So this card is often associated with the idea of flow. Do you go with the flow? Do you go against the flow? Do you go against the current? How do you choose to react in that way? Why might the fish be associated with money? Well, one thing is just that in the past fishing was a way of making a living, so that's one aspect of it. And with alcohol, well, fish are inside the water, and so there are various sayings associated with that, like drinking like a fish. So these are probably where the connections came, that this card is often associated with money, more in the sense of cash, so cash flow, money that flows in and out, that is exchanged in the same way that fish would be exchanged. This isn't money in the sense of an investment such as a big house, it really is more the day-to-day exchange of money. And as I say, alcohol, the kind of expression of drinking like a fish, or to be in your cups, all associated with being in a liquid substance, shall we say. So it's also the King of Diamonds, and so as a person this is associated with someone who's perhaps a businessman, a financially strong or independent person, and yes, traditionally a sort of older man in that regard. Let's look at the key words. As I say, money, quantity, material values, excess, because there really can be an awful lot of fish in a school, hidden problems and solutions, fruitfulness, commerce more generally, a transaction, alcohol flexibility, liquid flow. As a person, it's someone who's competent, hard-working, a materialistic man, traditionally mainly blonde, ideas of wealth, a friend or partner, brother or boss, business partner in particular, and a businessman. And spiritually, we might think about going with the flow, or the idea of spiritual abundance and plenty. For health, we have the associations to the kidneys, liver, bladder, glands, and a suggestion to drink more water. Penultimate card is the anchor. And the questions here: what is the purpose of an anchor? In the past, did the anchor represent faith, hope, or charity? And what do Protestants see as the path to salvation? The purpose of an anchor clearly is that it's dropped overboard to keep a boat in place, to keep it safe in harbour, for example, or to hold it in a spot while it's doing something. So the anchor speaks to us about groundedness, about stability, and perhaps also about settling. You put down your anchor when you decide to settle somewhere. So it's a card about that sort of sense of security. In the past, the anchor was a representation of hope. And so traditionally, This deck was called the Game of Hope, and that was because in the board game that it was used in, you wanted to actually get to the anchor and go no further. If you passed the anchor, then you kind of lost because you'd gone beyond it. When we think about hope as well, we come to the Protestant idea of salvation, which was said to be found through work. That you did good works in this life and that brought you salvation in the next life. And that's probably how come the anchor is now often associated with work, with your job. It's not just that that gives you a certain stability and groundedness, but also that it was your hope of salvation in old Protestant sort of thinking. So there are all of those words associated with this card. And we see that here in the key words, where we also find the idea not just of a job, but a career and profession, and that we can trust it, it's stable in that sense, gives us security. But also on the more negative side, it can be seen as ballast, as a heavy weight, as something that weighs us down. And so there are some readers who also associate it with married life. There's an idea of perseverance, but also that safe arrival or recognising your home base. At a very literal level, it can be an anchor, a weight, a beach, a port or a harbour. Spiritually, we talk about spiritual grounding, karma yoga, which is work as service. And for health, it's the hips, pelvis, coccyx, or grounding exercises. Turning finally to the cross. What does the expression having a cross to bear imply? How do you feel about ethical choices? And how easy are life lessons to learn? So with the expression having a cross to bear, clearly we think about Jesus Christ carrying the cross, and it suggests a burden that we have to carry. So this is a card associated with burdens and sorrows in that regard. However, we might also think about it, that cross that he was carrying has become a symbol of a particular religion. So it can also represent religion, spirituality, and faith. Perhaps dogma in a negative sense, but also faith in a positive sense. That leads us to the idea about ethics. Ethics, some people say, are your spirituality in action. So it's about what your spirituality then makes you do. And that can sometimes feel burdensome, but that doesn't necessarily make it a bad thing. Finally, how easy are life lessons to learn? Well, a cross to bear is a cross to bear. Life lessons can be very tricky. They can come back again and again. We think that we've mastered something and then, nope, you have to go through it again. So that's also something that can be implied by the cross. But it isn't necessarily a bad thing. We gain our greatest strength and our greatest learning from those life lessons, even if they aren't necessarily fun to go through as we're experiencing them. We see that in all of these key words, which do include distress and suffering, regret and remorse, but also the idea of the quintessence of something, mercy, selflessness, devotion, a talisman. Spiritually, as I say, ethics, faith, spiritual lessons and spiritual burdens. And in terms of health, well, having to lug that cross around would be hard on your back, so it's your intervertebral discs, lower back, back, arms, and the idea of relapse, as with life lessons that keep coming back, the same with our health, that we can have relapse. So we've come to an end looking at the particular cards of the Lenormand system, finishing up here with the cross.